The albatross was a stain of weathered canvas and salt-crusted wood against the infinite, blinding blue of the unknown Atlantic. Her crew, numbering 23 desperate souls, were men running from gallows, debts, or the crushing anonymity of their lives. They were led by Captain Silas Thorne, a man whose intellect was as sharp as his ambition, and just as cruel. It was the late spring of 1588, a time of empires and monsters. They were weeks past any known landmark, far from the Spanish Main chasing a phantom. The rumor had come from a dying, fever-racked Carib, captured in a skirmish near Hispaniola. In his final lucid moments, the man had not begged for his life, but for Thorne to avoid a place. He described an island, a black tooth in the sea, where the earth eats the living and the sky watches. So, Thorne, driven by a scholar's greed and an explorer's arrogance, saw only weakness. The Carib had clutched a single, heavy nugget of gold, its purity unlike anything Thorne had ever seen. Superstition was the tax of the ignorant, he believed. His true quarry was the mine that produced such a treasure. After weeks of sailing through treacherous, uncharted waters, battling storms that seemed to rise from nowhere, a smudge of green finally materialized on the horizon. It rose from the mist, not as a welcoming shore, but as a jagged volcanic peak, a fortress of black rock ringed by white, violent surf. Thorne named it Isla del Devorador, the Devourer's Isle. The landing party consisted of 4 men. Thorne, of course, carrying his charts and a silver-inlaid pistol. His first mate, Elias, a pragmatic, barrel-chested man who trusted only his cutlass and the ship's timbers. The boatswain, Finn, a man steeped in the superstitions of the sea, who clutched a worn wooden charm and muttered prayers as his boots touched the black sand. And finally, Thomas, the youthful cartographer, his eyes wide with the eager, dangerous curiosity of one who had never truly seen the world's horrors. An unnatural silence greeted them. The jungle was dense, ancient, and profoundly wrong. The trees were a sickly deep green, their trunks slick with an oily sap. There was no birdsong, no insectile hum, no chittering monkeys, only a heavy, humid stillness that pressed against the eardrums like a physical weight. The air was thick, tasting of wet earth, ozone, and something metallic, like a sword blade held to the tongue. "This place, it's dead, Captain," Finn whispered, his knuckles white on his charm. "It's quiet, boatswain." "There's a difference," Thorne snapped, though he too felt the oppressive weight of the silence. They followed a narrow, overgrown path inland. It was not a game trail. It was clearly artificial, paved with smooth, dark stones that were cold to the touch despite the tropic heat. It had been carved centuries ago by unknown hands. Within an hour they stumbled upon it, a cyclopean stone complex. It was a massive, tiered ziggurat of black basalt, not built with mortar, but formed of interlocking gargantuan blocks. The angles were strange, seeming to lean away from the eye, creating nauseating optical illusions. Thomas, the cartographer, stopped, his sketchbook trembling. "Captain, the lines. They don't meet where they should." He was right. The carvings were worse. They depicted no gods, no beasts, no rituals. They were purely geometric, complex, nauseatingly repetitive spirals and tessellations. Staring at them for more than a moment induced a profound vertigo, a sense that the stone itself was writhing, pulling the mind into its impossible, repeating patterns. In the center of the complex, a flat plaza, they found the vault. It was a sealed chamber, its entrance a massive circular slab of stone, easily 20 feet across. It was secured by 4 thick bronze chains, each link as thick as a man's arm, anchored deep into the living rock. "By God," Elias breathed, wiping sweat from his brow. What power was needed to seal this? Not even a galleon's anchor is so forged. Thorne's eyes, however, were fixed on the chains. They weren't merely functional. They were wards. Every single link was etched with the same dizzying, repulsive spirals from the walls, clearly meant to contain rather than just secure. The air around the chains was noticeably colder, and a faint, high-pitched thrumming vibrated up from the soles of their boots, a sound that felt like a needle in the brain. "It is a treasury," Thorne declared, his voice ringing with a conviction he didn't fully feel. "A king's ransom, locked away from the world." "Captain, no," Finn pleaded. "This is not a lockbox. This is a cage. Can you not feel it? The air itself is sick. Stow your muling, Finn." "Elias, Thomas, fetch the capstan bars and the sledge from the longboat. We are opening it." Greed and curiosity, a fatal combination, blinded them. It took them 3 agonizing hours. The anchor bolts, forged of an unknown rust-resistant metal, refused to yield. The men's muscles burned, their hands blistered and bled. With every jarring strike of the sledge, the thrumming from beneath the stone grew louder, shifting from a high-pitched whine to a low, resonant groan, as if a titan were stirring in its sleep. Finally, with a sound like a cracked rib, the first anchor snapped, then the second, and the third. "One more!" Thorne roared, his face slick with sweat and avarice. Elias swung the sledge in a wide arc. The iron head struck the final bolt. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the 4th chain clattered onto the stone. The unnatural stillness of the jungle was violently, apocalyptically broken. A sound erupted from within the chamber. Not a single sound, but a chorus, like 1,000 whispers, the grinding of vast tectonic plates, and the wet tearing of canvas, all at once. The circular slab, its wards broken, did not swing open. With a deafening, scraping shriek of stone on stone, its shore retracted and into the wall. A wave of profound, cold wind blasted from the opening, a psychic, abyssal cold that seemed to suck the heat from their very bones and the light from the air. The humid jungle air turned to frost. Their lanterns flickered, the flames turning a sickly pale blue. And then they saw it. The vault was not a treasury. It was a prison. At the chamber's core was a vast hemispherical depression, a bowl of polished black stone. Lying within it, stirring from its eons-long slumber, was the horror. It was not flesh, not as they understood it. It was coagulated shadow, given a 3-dimensional, impossible form. Its true nature defied definition, but its terrifying effect on the human psyche was immediate and absolute. Finn was the first to break. He let out a single strangled shriek, dropped his lantern and clawed at his eyes, as if to dig out the very sight of the thing. The creature, later to be known only in the maddened whispers of the sole survivor as the Heart of Malice, was a multi-limbed, pulsating mass. It was a churning hill of chitinous black plates and translucent, sickly white tentacles that ended not in suckers, but in needle-thin, quivering barbs. Its form was fluid, roughly the size of a carriage, constantly reshaping itself like ink in water. Its main body was protected by a shell that wasn't hard but brittle, constantly cracking and shedding flakes of what looked like dried, pulverized glass that shimmered faintly in the blue lantern light. It had no distinct head, but along its central undulating ridge were clusters of organs. 36 eyes, of differing sizes. None were spheres. They were almond-shaped, vertical slits that glowed with a sickening, internal lime-green phosphorescence. They did not track movement. They stared at nothing, at the very concept of the space between things, and in doing so, created an overwhelming, crushing sense of cosmic insignificance in the observers. But the horror's most immediate weapon was not physical. It was atmospheric and psychic. A palpable miasma of decay rolled out of the vault. It was not just a smell. It was an action. Within seconds, the jungle outside the vault's entrance began to die. The vibrant green leaves on the nearest trees instantly blackened, curled, and dropped like cinders. The men's metal tools, the sledge, the bars, began to rust and pit before their eyes, the iron weeping orange tears. Elias opened his canteen to drink, only to spit out a vile, colloidal sludge. Worse was the whisper. It was not a sound. It was a ringing, a pressure, a violation that bypassed the ears and manifested directly in the mind. It was an endless, churning stream of anti-thought, a chorus of all human suffering, the futility of hope, the coldness of the void, and the utter meaninglessness of existence, all spoken in a language of pure, mathematical terror. This was what broke Finn. His madness was immediate. He began to laugh, a high, giggling sound, as he turned and ran, not toward the path, but directly into the geometric carvings of the ziggurat wall, striking his head against the impossible angles, screaming, "It's so clear, it's all so clear." The heart of Malice moved. It did not walk or slither. It seemed to ooze and ripple, its numerous segmented glass-like legs lifting and depositing the mass with an unnerving silence. It left behind a glistening, oily residue that hissed and evaporated instantly, leaving the stone bleached white. It moved toward Thomas. The young cartographer was frozen, his sketchbook fallen open, his face a mask of catatonic terror. The whisper had him. He was paralyzed, watching the thing approach. One of the long, pale tentacles lashed out, faster than an adder, but it did not strike him. Instead, the needle-thin barb pierced the air an inch from his chest. The effect was horrifying. Thomas did not bleed. He did not scream. He simply changed. His skin, tan from the voyage, instantly became translucent, revealing the dark, pulsing network of his veins. Then his ribs became visible, and his internal organs began to shimmer and dissipate, not in an explosion, but a rapid, internal sublimation, like steam rising from a cold body. Within 3 seconds, Thomas was nothing but a dried, paper-thin husk of skin and bone, his eyes wide, milky, and empty, his youthful curiosity forever replaced by the empty horror of the void. The husk collapsed into a pile of dust and brittle bones. Captain Thorne, a man of hardened steel, a man who had ordered floggings and maroonings, finally broke. The scholar's greed evaporated, replaced by a primal animal terror. "Back!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Elias, back to the ship, seal it. SEALIT exclamation mark. But it was too late. The creature was already at the vault's entrance. It paused there, its dozens of lime-green eyes scanning the open sky, a sky it had not seen for millennia. It gave a soundless, colossal sigh, a profound expulsion of cosmic malice that rippled the air and caused the remaining trees to shudder and weep their oily sap. They fled. They abandoned Finn, whose rhythmic, wet thudding against the basalt pillar had finally gone silent. They left the pile of dust that was Thomas, Thorne and Elias, driven by a survival instinct that was already fraying at the edges of their sanity, scrambled, fell, and clawed their way back to the longboat. They did not look back, but they felt the difference in the air, as they rowed frantically for the albatross. The sky over Isla del Devorador was no longer blue. A bruised, churning purple-black cloud was spreading from the ziggurat, and a wind, a cold, unnatural wind, began to buffet their sails, carrying with it the metallic tang of old blood and the faintest, echoing thrum of that anti-thought. The heart of malice was no longer contained. It had been sealed away from the world, its very existence a contamination. Now, aboard the albatross, Thorne and Elias locked themselves in the captain's quarters. They didn't know it, but they carried the spore of its miasma in their lungs, on their skin, in their minds. The ship's wood began to feel damp and soft. The iron fittings began to weep rust. As they sailed frantically toward the populated ports of Europe, their minds shattered, their ship itself becoming an incubator. They were no longer explorers. They were couriers, delivering the geometrical madness and a plague of rapid physical decay to a world wholly unprepared for the true nature of the cosmos. The 16th century was about to become infinitely darker